The Pandyan dynasty was an ancient Tamil dynasty, one of the three Tamil dynasties, the other two being the Chola and the Chera. The Pandya King, along with Chera King and Chola King, were referred to as the three crowned kings of Tamilakam. The dynasty ruled parts of South India from around 600 BCE to first half of 17th century CE. They initially ruled the country Pandya Nadu from Korkai, a seaport on the southernmost tip of the Indian Peninsula, and in later times moved to Madurai, fish being the flag. Pandyas were experts in water management, agriculture and fisheries, and they were eminent sailors and sea traders too. Pandyan was well known since ancient times, with contacts, even diplomatic, reaching the Roman Empire. The Pandian Empire was home to temples including Meenakshi Amman Temple in Madurai, and Nelayappa Temple built on the bank of the river Thamirabarani in Tirunelveli. The Pandya kings were called either Jatavarman or Maravarman Pandyan. From being Jains in their early ages, they became Shaivites after some centuries of rule. Strabo states that an Indian king called Pandyan sent Augustus Caesar presents and gifts of honor. The country of the Pandyas, Pandya was described as Pandyan Mediterranea in the Periplus and Madurai Regia Pandyan by Ptolemy. The early Pandyan dynasty of the Sangam literature faded into obscurity upon the invasion of the Calabras. The dynasty revived under Kadungan in the early 6th century, pushed the Calabras out of the Tamil country and ruled from Madurai. They again went into decline with the rise of the Cholas in the 9th century and were in constant conflict with them. The Pandyas allied themselves with the Sinhalese and the Cheras in harassing the Chola Empire until they found an opportunity for reviving their fortunes during the late 13th century. The later Pandyas entered the Golden Age under Maravarman Sundara Pandyan and Jatavarman Sundara Pandyan, who expanded the empire into Telugu country, conquered Kalinga and invaded and conquered Sri Lanka. They also had extensive trade links with the Southeast Asian maritime empires of Srivijaya and the successors. The Pandyas excelled in both trade and literature. They controlled the pearl fisheries along the South Indian coast between Sri Lanka and India, which produced some of the finest pearls in the known ancient world. Traditionally, the legendary Sangams were held in Madurai under the patronage, and some of the Pandya kings were poets themselves. During the history, the Pandyas were repeatedly in conflict with the Pallavas, Cholas, Hoysalas, and finally the Muslim invaders from the Delhi Sultanate. The Islamic invasion led to the end of Pandyan supremacy in South India. 1323, Jaffna Kingdom in Sri Lanka declared its independence from the crumbling Pandyan Empire. The Pandyans lost their capital city Madurai to Madurai Sultanate in 1335. However, they shifted the capital to Tanksi and continued to rule the Tirunelveli, Tuticorin, Brumanad, Shivagangai regions. Meanwhile, Madurai Sultanate was replaced by Naik governors of Vijayanagar in 1378. In 1529, Naik governors declared independence and established Madurai. Naik dynasty. Etymology. The word Pandya is derived from the Tamil word Pandu, meaning very old. Another theory is that the word Pandya is derived from the Tamil word Pandi, meaning bull. Ancient Tamils considered the bull as a sign of masculinity and valor. The earliest Pandyans probably used the bull as its emblem. Another theory suggests that in Sangam Tamil lexicon the word Pandya means old country, in contrast with Chola meaning new country, Chera meaning hill country, and Pallava meaning branch in Sanskrit. The Chera, Chola and Pandya of the traditional Tamil siblings, and together with the Pallavas, are the major kings that ruled ancient Tamilakam. Historians have used several sources to identify the origins of the early Pandyan dynasty with the pre-Christian era, and also to piece together the names of the Pandyan kings. Pandyas were the longest ruling dynasty of Indian history. Unfortunately, the exact genealogy of these kings has not been authoritatively established yet. Mythology. According to the epic Mahabharata, the legendary Maladwaja Pandya, who sided with the Pandavas and took part in the Kurukshetra war of the Mahabharata, is described as follows in Karna Parva. Although knowing that the shafts of the high-souled son of Drona employed in shooting were really inexhaustible, yet Pandya, that bull among men, cut them all into pieces. Maladwaja Pandya and his queen Kushanamala had one daughter, that Arthagai alias Meenakshi, who succeeded her father and reigned the kingdom successfully. The Madurai Meenakshi Amman temple was built after her. The city of Madurai was built around this temple. It is also notable that the etymology of the name Meenakshi came from two Tamil words Meenadachi, which collectively means rule of the fish. History. Literary sources. Although there are many instances of the Pandyas being referred to in surviving ancient Hindu texts including the Mahabharata, we currently have no way of determining a cogent genealogy of these ancient kings. We have a connected history of the Pandyas from the fall of Kalabras during the middle of the 6th century. Tamil literary sources. Several Tamil literary works, such as Arayunaragapural, mention the legend of three separate Tamil sangams lasting several centuries before the Christian era and ascribe the patronage to the Pandyas. The Sangam poem Madurai, conceived by Mankudi Maruthana, contains a full-length description of Madurai and the Pandyan country under the rule of Nadunj Chelian III. The Nedunalvade by Nakara contains a description of the king's palace. The Purananuru and Agananuru collections of the 3rd century BCE contain poems sung in praise of various Pandyan kings and also poems that were composed by the kings themselves. Kalitokai mentions that many Tamil Naga tribes such as Maravar Ayanar, Olia, Ovia, Aruvalura and Parathavar migrated to the Pandyan kingdom and started living there in the 3rd Tamil Sangam period 2000 years ago. Sanskrit literary sources. Ramayana makes a few references to the Pandyas. For instance, when Sugriva sends his monkey warriors to search Sita, he mentions Chera, Chola and Pandya of the southern region. Kalidas's Raghuvamsha, an epic poem about Rama's dynasty, states that Ravana signed a peace treaty with a Pandya king. Mahabharata mentions the Pandyas more number of times. It states that the Pandya country was located on the seashore, and supplied troops to the Pandava king Yudhishthira during the war. The Pandya king Sarangadwaja commanded 140,000 warriors. Pandya warrior Malayadwaja had a 1-to-1 fight with Drona's son Ashwathama. Mahabharata mentions that Tithas of Agastya, Varuna and Kumari were located in the Pandya country. Early Pandyas. The following is a partial list of Pandian emperors who ruled during the Sangam age. The lists of the Pandya kings are based on the authoritative history of South India from the early times to the fall of Vijayanagar by K.A.N. Sastry, Oxford U Press, New Delhi. Kun Pandian, Nadunjelayanai, Padapandian, Mudikudume Paruvaludi, Nadunjelayan II, Nanmaran, Nadunjchelian III, Miran Valudi, Kadalan Valudi, Musari Mutria Chelian, Kadalul Maina Akarat Paruvaludi. First Pandian Empire. After the close of the Sangam age, the First Pandian Empire was established by Kadungan in the 6th century by defeating the Kalabras. The following chronological list of the Pandya Emperors is based on an inscription found on the Vaigai riverbeds. Succeeding kings assumed the titles of Sadayavarman and Maravarman alternately, denoting themselves as followers of Lord Sadayan, Sivan and Lord Thirumal respectively. After the defeat of the Kalabras, the Pandya kingdom grew steadily in power and territory. With the Cholas in obscurity, the Tamil country was divided between the Pallavas and the Pandyas, the river Kaveri being the frontier between them. After Vijayalaya, Chola conquered Thanjavur by defeating the Madurai chieftains who were part of Pandya family tree around 850. The Pandyas went into a period of decline. They were constantly harassing the Chola overlords by occupying the territories. Parantaka I invaded the Pandya territories and defeated Rajsimha III. However, the Pandyas did not wholly submit to the Cholas despite loss of power, territory and prestige. They tried to forge various alliances with the Cheras and the kings of Lanka and tried to engage the Cholas in war to free themselves from Chola supremacy. But right from the times of Parantaka I to the early 12th century up to the times of Kolatunga Chola I, the Pandyas could not overpower the Cholas, who right from 880–1215 remained the most powerful empire spread over South India, Deccan and the eastern and western coast of India during this period. List of kings are given below. Kadungan, Maravarman Avaniculamani, Seshan Sendan, Arakasari Maravarman Indrasir Nadumaran, Kochadayan Ranadaran, Arakasari Parinkus Maravarman Rajsimhai, Jatila Parantaka, Rasasingan II, Viragunan I, Sramara Srivawalabha, Viragunavarman II, Parantaka Varanarajana, Maravarman Rajsimha II. Under Chola influence, the Chola domination of the Tamil country began in earnest during the reign of Parantaka Chola II. Chola armies led by Aditya Karikala, son of Parantaka Chola II, defeated Veera Pandya in battle. The Pandyas were assisted by the Sinhalese forces of Madurai. The Pandyas were driven out of the territories and had to seek refuge on the island of Sri Lanka. This was the start of the long exile of the Pandyas. They were replaced by a series of Chola viceroys with the title Chola Pandyas who ruled from Madurai from c. 1020. The Chola yoke started from about 920 and lasted until the start of the 13th century. The following list gives the names of the Pandya kings who were active during the 10th century and the first half of 11th century. Sundara Pandyai, Veera Pandyai, Veera Pandya II, Amara Bhujangativrakopa, Jatavarman Sundara Chola Pandya, Maravarman Vikrama Chola Pandya, Maravarman Parikrama Chola Pandya, Jatavarman Chola Pandya, Sirvalabarman Akulachala, Maravarman Sirvalaban, Parikrama Pandyan I, Kulasekara Pandyan III, Veera Pandyan III, Jatavarman Srivawalaban, Jatavarman Kulasekaran I. Second Pandian Empire. The 13th century is the greatest period in the history of the Pandian Empire. This period saw the rise of 7 prime lord emperors of Pandyan, who ruled the kingdom alongside Pandyan princes. The power reached its zenith under Jatavarman Sundara Pandyan in the middle of the 13th century. The foundation for such a great empire was laid by Maravarman Sundara Pandyan early in the 13th century. Parikrama Pandyan II, Maravarman Sundara Pandyan, Sundaravarman Kulasekaran II, Maravarman Sundara Pandyan II, Jatavarman Sundara Pandyan, Maravarman Kulasekara Pandyan I, Sundara Pandyan IV, Veera Pandyan IV. The Pandyan kingdom was replaced by the Chola princes who assumed the title as Chola Pandyas in the 11th century, after being overshadowed by the Pallavas and Cholas for centuries. Pandyan glory was briefly revived by Maravarman Sundara Pandyan and by the much celebrated Jatavarman Sundara Pandyan I in 1251. The Pandya power extended from the Telugu countries on banks of the Godavari River to the northern half of Sri Lanka, which was invaded by Sundara Pandyan in 1258 and on his behalf by his younger brother Jatavarman Vira Pandyan from 1262 to 1264. Later Jatavarman, Sundara Pandyan appointed his brother to rule Kongu country, Chola Nadu and Hoysala country. Jatavarman Vira Pandyan's clan was later called as Kongu Pandya and he is the first Kongu Pandya king. The revival of the Pandyan dynasty was to coincide with the gradual but steady decline of the Chola Empire. The last 2 or 3 Chola kings who followed Chera.The were either very weak or incompetent. The Cholas of course did not lack valor but had been unable to stop the revival of the Pandian Empire from the times of Maravarman Sundara Pandyan. The revival of the Kadava Pallavas at Kanchi under Kopran Chungra and indeed the growing power and status of the Telugu Cholas, the Renanti and the Arangola Cholas of the Telugu country, for the last 3 named had been very trusted allies of the Cholas up to Chera.The, having helped him in conquering Kalinga. The marital alliance of Chera.The and one of his successors, Raja III, with the Hoysalas did not yield any advantage, though Chera.The took the help of the Hoysalas in countering the Pandian resurgence. Chera.The had even conquered Kuru, the Cheras in addition to Madurai, Ilam and Kalinga. However, his strength rested on support from Hoysalas, whose king Veerabalala II was his son-in-law. However, Veerabalala II himself had lost quite a bit of his territories between 1208 to 1212 to his local adversaries in Kannada country, like the Kalashuras, CNAs etc. The resurgent Pandyans under Maravarman Sundara Pandyan went to war against Chera.The and first at Kandy and then near Maniparai on the outskirts of modern Tiruchirappalli. The Pandyans routed the Chola army and entered Tiruchi, Tiruvarongam and Thanjavur victorious in war. But it appears that in the Tiruchi and Tiruvarongam areas, there was renewed control of the Cholas, presumably with the help of the Hoysalas under Vira Somaswara, with the Hoysalas later shifting their allegiance to the Pandyans either during the last years of Maravarman Sundara Pandyan or the early years of his successor Jatavarman Sundara Pandyan. Jatavarman Sundara Pandyan was a very brave, ambitious warrior king who wanted to completely subjugate the Cholas. He initially tolerated the presence of the Hoysalas under Vira Someshwara with his son Visvanathararamanatha ruling from Kuppam near Samayapuram, on the outskirts of Tiruvarongam. This was because other feudatories of the Hoysalas were also growing in power and threatening the Hoysala kingdom itself. Besides, the Delhi Sultanate invasion of the Deccan had started under Malik Kafur. The challenged Hoysalas did have a foothold in and around Tiruchi and Tiruvarongam for a few years and seem to have indulged in some temple-building activity at Tiruvarongam also. But Jatavarman Sundara Pandyan, who subdued Rajendra Chola III in around 1258 to 1260, was an equal antagonist of the Hoysalas whose presence he absolutely disliked in the Tamil country. He first vanquished the Kadava Pallavas under Kopran Chungan II, who had challenged the Hoysala army stationed in and around Kashi and killed a few of the commanders, though Rajendra III suffered another defeat at the hands of Vira Someshwara. Because of the growing power of Pandyans being felt by both Cholas and Hoysalas, there was a political affinity between the two which was cemented also by marital relations. At the time the Pandyans and the Kadava Pallavas, with an earlier Chola Raja III, having been held in captivity by Kopran Chungatu and his release being secured by the Hoysalas. Ultimately, the Kadava Pallavas, Hoysalas and also the Telugu Chola who invaded Kanchi were all one by one vanquished by Jatavarman Sundara Pandyan, with the Cholas finally becoming extinct after defeat of Hoysala Ramanatha as well as his ally Rajendra III around 1279 by Maravarman Kulasekara Pandyan. Jatavarman Sundara Pandyan seized the opportunity, with the Hoysalas being in Tiruchi and not having any ally. The rapidly weakening Cholas seeking alliance with the Kadava Pallavas, who were themselves being threatened by the Telugu Cholas. In 1254 Jatavarman first dragged the Hoysalas into war by routing his son Ramanatha out of Tiruchi. Virasomshwara Hoysala, who had given the control of the empire to his sons, had to come out of his slumber and tried to challenge Jatavarman. Between Samayapuram and Tiruchi, the armies of Virasomshwara were routed, with Virasomshwara losing his life in this battle. This ended the presence of the Hoysalas in Tamil country. Next, the Pandyan prince Jatavarman concentrated on completely wiping out the Chola Empire. Raja III had interfered in an earlier Pandyan war of succession and defeated a confederation of Pandyan princes. The predecessors of Jatavarman Sundara Pandyan had suffered at the time of the Chola invasion, and he wanted to take revenge. This was his opportunity. Rajendra III had been counting on Hoysala assistance in case he was challenged by the Pandians. Keeping in mind the earlier marital alliance of the Cholas with the Hoysalas, initially Jatavarman consolidated the Pandyan hold on Tiruchi and Tiruvarangam and marched towards Tannur and Kumbakonam. The Chola capital of Gangaikonda Kolapuram, too, was not far from reach. During the years 1270 to 1276 it appeared that Rajendra III ruled mainly in and around Gangaikonda Kolapuram and Tannur. Tiruchi and Tiruvarangam had been lost by the Cholas to the Pandyas forever, at least from 1254. Though Rajendra III had been opposed to the Hoysalas due to their alliance with the Pandians, with new hostilities emerging between Hoysalas and the Pandians, Rajendra III had hoped for renewed friendship and military alliance with the Hoysalas. When challenged by Jatavarman Sundara Pandyan, the brave but tactically naive Rajendra III marched against the Pandians between Tannur and Tiruchi, hoping for assistance and participation in war from the Hoysalas. However, the already vanquished Hoysalas were in a defensive position. They did not want to go to war and risk yet another defeat by the resurgent Pandians. Rajendra III, hopelessly isolated, was thoroughly routed and humiliated in this war, which is variously dated as between 1268 to 1270. The known rule of Jatavarman Sundara Pandyan is of course up to 1268 only. Probably Rajendra III fled the battlefield and had continued in obscurity up to 1279, but without any of the erstwhile Chola territories. By 1280, the Chola Empire was no more. Pandyan Civil War. On the death of Maravarman Kulasekara Pandyan I in 1308, a conflict stemming from succession disputes arose amongst his sons. Sundara Pandyan and Vira Pandyan fought each other for the throne. Sundara Pandyan, however, with the help of his loyal generals and Veera Balala III, was successful in suppressing Vira Pandyan. Delhi Sultanate expedition. Scenarios changed during 1311, when Alauddin Khilji of Khilji dynasty sent his general Malik Kafur on an expedition expedition to the kingdoms of the south, which led to the capture of Warangal and the defeat of the Hoysala Empire south of the Krishna River. Malik Kafur was not seeking to expand the borders of the Delhi Sultanate, he was engaging in a military treasure hunt on the Sultan's behalf. Malik's victory over Veera Ballala III and loot of Hindu temples at Ale Biju sent alarming bells to the Pandyan kingdom. Malik Kafur, on the other hand, heard about the raised strength of the Pandyan army and its defensive position within the walls of Madurai, was reluctant in carrying out his expedition further south. It was Ala-ud-Din Khilji himself ordered and sent reinforcements to Malik Kafur to attack Madurai after hearing the richness of it via Virupaksha Ballala, who was sent to Delhi as an act of peace by his defeated father Veera Ballala III. Being a strong Saivite, Sundara Pandyan was enraged by the destruction of the Hindu temples by the Muslim armies. He assembled his army and planned to march them at once to face the invading armies of the Delhi Sultanate. This idea was, however, opposed by Veera Pandyan, who felt that taking a defensive position might be more advantageous. Sundara Pandyan ignored his words and ordered his army to march, leaving Veera Pandyan to safeguard Madurai with his men. The Pandyan army managed to march well intact till Mela Thirukatupalli, but the reliance on the river Kaveri as the water source turned disastrous as the river ran dry during the hot summer of 1311. The already exhausted Pandyan army planned to march west in search of nearby water source. The speed was drastically reduced due to the general's decision of marching on the dried beds of river Kaveri. Malik Kafur's forces, on the other hand, tactically planned on the ration and water supplies, met Sundara Pandyan much before Tiruchirappalli. The physically exhausted Pandyan infantry easily fell prey for the Sultanate's army. However, the Pandyan cavalry revived its attack on the Delhi Sultanate cavalry, but the cavaliers were well armed with turquipoles and chainmail armors, while Pandyan horsemen were inferiorly armored and heavily relied on heavy swords. Tactical strikes by Malik Kafur's crossbowmen over the Pandya cavalry, followed by the Delhi Sultanate infantry's attack, blocked any possible retreat for the Sundara Pandyan's army. The generals of Kafur's army took Sundara Pandyan as captive and beheaded all the others captured. Few Pandyan cavaliers managed to escape to Madurai to report the defeat to Veera Pandya. The victorious Sultanate went on plundering the temples of Tiruchirappalli and Tiruvarangam. The walled city of Madurai was now left only with the Veera Pandyan's men. The sole aim was to safeguard Meenakshi Sundaraswara temple. Understanding the fact that they were largely outnumbered, the defenders' only hope is to delay their enemies long enough for them to negotiate. Kafur's siege on Madurai continued for weeks. However, it turned futile as his army lacked any ballistas or trebuchets and relied on battering rams of inferior quality. On the other hand, continuous archery attack by Pandyan soldiers and surprise cavalry attacks on the Delhi Sultanate infantry during night times tremendously increased the casualties on Kafur's side. Malik Kafur lost about half of his army and had to leave without any indemnity. Decline and fall. Following this, there were two other expeditions from the Khilji Sultanate in 1314 led by Khusro Khan and in 1323 by Ulugh Khan under Sultan Ghiyath al-Din Tughlaq. These invasions shattered the Pandian Empire beyond revival. While the previous invasions were content with plunder, Ulugh Khan annexed the former Pandian dominions to the Delhi Sultanate as the province of Malabar. Most of South India came under the Delhi's rule and was divided into 5 provinces: the Vajiri, Tiling, Kampili, Dorasamudra and Malabar. Jalaluddin Hasan Khan was appointed governor of the newly created southernmost Malabar province of the Delhi Sultanate by Muhammad bin Tughlaq. In 1333, Sayyid Jalaluddin Hasan Khan declared his independence and created Madurai Sultanate, a short-lived independent Muslim kingdom based in the city of Madurai. Hoysala King Veerabalala III, from his capital in Tiruvannamalai, challenged the Madurai Sultans at Kannanur near Srirangam and died fighting them in 1343. Bukhara of Vijayanagara Empire conquered the city of Madurai in 1371, imprisoned the Sultan, released and restored Arcot's Tamil prince Sambhuvaraya to the throne. Bukka I appointed his son Veerakumara Kampana as the viceroy of the Tamil region. Later, Nayaka governors were appointed. Architecture. Pandyan architecture. Rock cut and structural temples a significant part of Pandyan architecture. Vimana, Mandapa and Shikara are some of the features of the early Pandyan temples. Groups of small temples are seen at Tiruchirappalli district of Tamil Nadu. The Shiva temples have a Nandi in front of the Maha Mandapa. In the later stages of Pandya's rule, finely sculptured idols, portals of temples or gopurams on vimanas, were developed. Gopurams of the rectangular entrance and portals of the temples. The portions above the entrance is pyramidal in shape. Gradually gopurams were given more importance than shikaras. Meenakshi Temple in Madurai and Nelliyappa Temple in Tirunelveli were built during the reign of the Pandyas.